He used me for
My
3 years,
name is
so
Sophia,
I teamed
and
up
I've
with his side
always
chick to
believed in
destroy
love.
him. My name is
Or at
Sophia, and
least
I've
I
always
used
believed
to.
in love. Or at least I
But I
used to.
didn't.
I had been with Bob for
Or
three
at
years,
least I thought
3 long years of
he was
sacrifices,
charming,
of
funny,
giving everything I
always
had and
happy,
receiving little in
everything.
return. He was the kind of guy who promised me the world, but his actions told a different story. He didn't work. He didn't contribute. He didn't even drive my car, which I paid for. Yet, somehow he seemed to always have the latest gadgets, new clothes, and a lifestyle that didn't make sense. I should have seen it coming. But I didn't. I loved him, or at least I thought I did. He was charming, funny, and always seemed to have an excuse for everything. I remember the first time I realized something wasn't right. It was one of those lazy Sundays where we were both at home, and I noticed Bob on his phone more than usual. The screen was tilted away from me, and his fingers tapped furiously as if he didn't want me to see what was happening. I didn't think much of it at first. People need their privacy, right? But when he left the room and left his phone on the kitchen counter, I couldn't help but glance at it. What I saw made my stomach drop. Text after text from a woman named June. Messages full of affection, flirtation, and more. At first, I thought it was a joke, a misunderstanding. Maybe a coworker who had a little too much to drink, or a friend teasing him. But as I scrolled further, the truth became undeniable. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a flirty exchange. This was something more. Something serious. Bob wasn't just using me for my resources, he was using me to impress someone else. I felt my chest tighten, my hands shaking as I tried to process what I was reading. My boyfriend, the person I had been with for years, was cheating on me. And worse, he was doing it with someone who didn't even have to work for her own comfort, because he was using my money to make her feel special. I confronted him about it that evening. I tried to stay calm, trying to hide the wave of anger and betrayal that was building up inside me. But when he looked me in the eye and tried to brush it off, I lost it. I asked him why. Why did he do this? Wasn't I enough? But he didn't apologize. He didn't show guilt. Instead, he acted like I was overreacting. "We're fine, Sophia." "It's not what you think," he said, his voice smooth like he was trying to talk me down from a panic attack. But I wasn't panicking. I was seeing the truth for what it was. And that truth was that I had been played. The next few days were a blur of emotions, anger, confusion, hurt, but most of all, betrayal. I had spent 3 years giving my all to a relationship that was nothing more than a lie. Everything I had done for him, everything I had sacrificed, my money, my car, my phone, all of it had been used to keep him in a comfortable bubble, one where he could charm his way through life, all while keeping his side piece happy. But then, something inside me changed. This wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't about him getting away with it. It was about justice. And if he thought he could get away with this, he was wrong. I wasn't going to let this betrayal slide. I wasn't going to cry, beg, or plead. I was going to take matters into my own hands, and I was going to make him feel the sting of his own choices. I reached out to June. After I found out about June, I felt this strange sense of empowerment. It was like a fire had been lit inside me, a fire that could no longer be ignored. For the first time in months, I wasn't just a passive participant in my own life. I was going to take control, and I wasn't going to do it alone. I had always believed that when it came to betrayal, the best course of action was to walk away, to let the other person self-destruct. But in that moment, I realized that revenge didn't have to be solitary. I didn't have to suffer in silence. I had the power to make things right, and June, his side chick, was the key. I'd thought about reaching out to her before, but I didn't know how to begin. "What do you say to the woman your boyfriend has been cheating on you with? Hey, I know you've been seeing Bob and I just found out. So, wanna help me ruin his life?" I had no idea what her reaction would be. Would she be defensive? Would she even believe me? But I couldn't wait around and let Bob keep lying to both of us. Something needed to change. I sent her a simple message, though it wasn't as casual as I had hoped. My hands shook as I typed the text, unsure of how she would react. But I had to know. "Hey June, this is Sophia. We need to talk." The message sat in my phone for hours. I was tempted to delete it, to back out of this crazy plan, but my anger kept me glued to the screen. The message was sent. Minutes later she responded. "What do you want?" Her reply was blunt, but there was a tension beneath her words, a sense that she knew exactly who I was and what I had found out. I hesitated before I wrote back. "I know about you and Bob. I know what he's been doing. I think it's time we have a conversation." I expected her to be angry, defensive. But instead she replied almost immediately. "I knew this was coming. I don't know what you think I've been doing, but you're right. We need to talk." And that was it. The first step of the rest of my plan was in motion. We agreed to meet up the next day at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. I wasn't sure what to expect, but as I walked in, I saw her sitting alone at a table by the window. She wasn't what I expected. She wasn't some other woman I could easily hate. She was ordinary, normal even, and, to be honest, that made the whole situation even more complicated. I sat down across from her. She didn't smile, didn't greet me. She just stared at me, her arms crossed tightly, like she was preparing for a battle. "So what now?" she asked, her voice flat. I studied her for a moment before speaking. "I'm not here to fight with you. I'm here because Bob's been lying to both of us. He's been using me, living off my money, my car, everything, while pretending that he's faithful to me. And I think it's time we made him pay for what he's done." She leaned back in her chair, taking a slow sip of her coffee. "I don't know what you want me to do. You think I don't know he's been lying to me too? He's a scumbag. But I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be his second choice." Her words stung, but I didn't flinch. This was the moment of truth. She wasn't the villain here, Bob was. "You didn't ask for this," I said, my voice steady. "But now you have a choice. We both do. We can walk away and let him keep getting away with it, or we can make sure he never does this to anyone again. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm asking for your help. I'm asking you to help me destroy him." Her eyes narrowed slightly, and for the first time, I saw a spark of something more than frustration in her face: anger. She knew what Bob had done to her, just like I knew what he had done to me. The betrayal ran deep for both of us. "What do you have in mind?" she asked quietly, leaning forward slightly, her voice lowering. I smiled. This was it. The plan was in motion and it would work. We start by hitting him where it hurts. We make sure he loses everything: his job, his friends, his dignity, and we do it together. The days following our meeting were a blur of planning and plotting. June and I were careful, calculating every move as we set our trap for Bob. It wasn't just about embarrassing him or making him regret what he had done. It was about ensuring he never got the chance to hurt another woman the way he had hurt both of us. June was surprisingly resourceful, her knowledge of Bob's routine and his weaknesses giving us the upper hand. She knew where he liked to hang out after work, the places he frequented when he thought no one was watching, and the people he trusted. The more we talked, the clearer it became that Bob wasn't as clever as he thought. One thing I had to admit was that June wasn't as bad as I initially thought. Sure, she was part of the betrayal, but in the end she was just as much of a victim as I was. We both had been used by Bob, and now it was time to take control. The plan was simple. We would set Bob up in a way that would make him believe he was getting everything he wanted while we watched from behind the scenes. He had always been a master of deceit, but he didn't know that we were 2 steps ahead. We started with Bob's job. He had been coasting by on my resources for too long, using my car and phone, acting like he didn't have to lift a finger. His boss had always been a bit of a pushover, but I knew that Bob's laziness would eventually catch up to him. So, we decided to give him a little nudge. June had a contact in the HR department. All it took was a few well-placed phone calls and a carefully timed tip-off about Bob's attitude and work ethic. We didn't want him to lose his job immediately. That would be too easy. Instead, we let him think he was safe while his boss started paying closer attention. We made sure that Bob felt comfortable, like everything was fine, even as we tightened the noose. Next, we targeted his social life. Bob had always been the life of the party, surrounded by friends who were too loyal to question his behavior. But as soon as we started digging, we found out a different story. Bob wasn't the center of attention like he thought he was. His so-called friends were all too willing to cut ties with him as soon as they learned about his cheating. We made sure the whispers about him spread like wildfire, painting him as the fraud he truly was. But the most satisfying part of the plan was yet to come. We were going to make sure Bob lost the one thing he cherished the most: my TV. It wasn't just any TV. It was the big, expensive flat screen I had bought for us when we moved in together, and Bob had always acted like it was his prized possession. I knew he loved it more than anything else, which made it the perfect bait. So I set it up. I made sure the TV disappeared, in the most public, embarrassing way possible. It would be the perfect cherry on top of his fall from grace. We orchestrated it perfectly. I made sure Bob was at his favorite bar, just a few streets down from our apartment. Meanwhile, June and I moved the TV out of the living room and placed it in a nearby storage unit. We arranged for one of Bob's friends to borrow it for the night. As he returned to the apartment, he would find his most prized possession gone, and we would be watching from the shadows. The beauty of the plan was that Bob would have no idea who was behind it. He would be left to piece together the humiliation and loss all on his own, unable to point the finger at anyone but himself. We didn't just want him to feel the sting of betrayal, We wanted him to feel small, to understand that his entire life had been built on lies, manipulation, and laziness. As the day of the final act drew near, I could feel the adrenaline running through my veins. This was it, the moment when Bob would finally have to pay for everything he had done. I had no sympathy left for him, not after all the lies, the cheating, the way he had used me for his own gain. The countdown had begun. The day of the final stage of our plan had arrived. I woke up early, my stomach twisted with anticipation, though I refused to let it show. This wasn't just about getting back at Bob. This was about teaching him the ultimate lesson. The lesson that he couldn't use people forever without facing consequences. I hadn't heard from Bob that morning. The silence was expected. He had no idea what was coming. As the hours passed, I prepared myself mentally, making sure every detail was in place. We had timed this perfectly. June and I had our roles clearly set out. I would stay out of sight while June would be the one to make sure Bob was cornered in his favorite haunt, the bar where he'd go to blow off steam, where he'd feel comfortable and distracted, unaware of the trap we were about to spring. By 3 p.m., everything was in motion. I watched from a distance as June took her position. She was talking to one of Bob's friends, getting him involved in the ruse. Bob, thinking his day was just like any other, was distracted, lost in his world of laziness and the belief that he was untouchable. It wasn't just about the job loss or the stolen TV. The final blow would be the humiliation. The sting that would burn the deepest was going to hit him right at the moment when he least expected it, when he thought everything was still fine, when he thought he could get away with it. I made my way to the storage unit where we had hidden the TV, waiting for the perfect moment to make my move. The plan was simple. Bob would return home expecting everything to be in place, only to find the living room empty, his precious TV gone, his life unraveling before his eyes. As I stood there, waiting, I could almost feel the tension building. The look on his face when he discovered the theft would be priceless. The confusion, the disbelief, the anger. Everything he had taken for granted would come crashing down in that one moment. The fear of being caught, of losing everything would grip him. I glanced at my phone to check the time. Bob would be walking through the door soon. My hands felt clammy and my pulse quickened. This was it, the moment I'd been preparing for. June had texted me earlier that Bob had left the bar and he was heading home. As the door opened, I felt the rush of emotions flood my chest. I quickly left the storage unit, knowing that it was time to head back to the apartment. Everything had to be just right. I waited outside, knowing that Bob would be back within minutes. The sound of his car approaching sent a chill down my spine. As he pulled into the parking spot, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. This was the moment he would realize that everything he had taken from me, everything he had stolen, was finally coming back to haunt him. I moved quickly into the shadows, hidden from view as Bob entered the apartment. I stood there watching him from the doorway. His footsteps were slow, almost deliberate as he walked into the living room. The first thing he noticed was the empty space. His eyes widened in confusion as he took a few steps toward the wall where the TV had been, his hands reaching for it, expecting to feel the cool surface. But there was nothing. He turned around, his voice rising in confusion. "What the hell?" he muttered under his breath. "Where the hell is the TV?" His panic was palpable. I could hear his breath catch in his throat as he took another step forward, searching the room as if it would magically appear. And then, the sound of the door opening again. "Hey Bob. I hope you're ready to talk." June's voice rang out, cold and calculated as she stepped into the room. She wasn't afraid of him. She had been used just like me and now she was here to make him face the truth. Bob spun around, his face reddening with frustration. "What the hell, June? What's going on here? Where is it? The TV? You know, the one you've been stealing from Sophia and living off of?" June said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I thought you'd like to know that it's been taken. By your ex-girlfriend and me. You don't get to play both of us anymore." Bob's eyes darted back and forth between June and the empty wall. His mind was racing, trying to piece together the puzzle of the situation. He looked at June in disbelief. You two planned this? What the hell is wrong with you?" His anger was rising, his fists clenched in fury. But it didn't faze either of us. We knew he had no control over the situation anymore. The power had shifted. "Oh Bob," June said, stepping closer. "This isn't just about the TV or the money you've been using. This is about everything you've been doing to both of us. You used Sophia's resources for months, making her feel like she was crazy for trusting you. You think we didn't know what you were doing? You think you could get away with it?" I stayed hidden, watching as the scene unfolded. I wanted to make sure he felt every ounce of humiliation before we went any further. He had made us both believe in him, and now he would have to face the consequences. But Bob was still trying to play the victim. "You don't know what you're doing," he spat. "You can't do this. You can't just take my things and think it'll be okay." "Oh, it's not okay, Bob," I said, stepping out of the shadows and into the room, my voice calm but filled with authority. "You used me. You used her. And now you're going to face what you've done." The tension in the room was palpable as Bob stood there, his face flushed with anger and disbelief. He was still trying to piece everything together, but it was clear that he wasn't in control anymore. The way he glared at June and me as if this was all just a misunderstanding, made me realize just how far removed he was from the reality of what he had done. He'd spent years living off my money, my car, my phone, all while deceiving me with lies and false promises. He had played both of us, June and me, like pawns in some twisted game, never once considering the consequences. "You think you can just destroy my life like this?" Bob spat, his voice trembling with frustration. He was no longer the confident, charming man I had once known. He was unraveling before us, exposed for the fraud he had always been. "I think it's time someone taught you a lesson, Bob," I said, my voice steady, firm, and finally free of the anger that had clouded my judgment. "You don't get to live off other people's hard work without facing the consequences. You don't get to cheat, lie, and manipulate and think everything will be fine." Bob's eyes darted to June. He was desperately trying to regain control, his words faltering. "June, you don't get it. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't think this would happen." But June wasn't having it. She stepped forward, crossing her arms, her expression hardening. "You didn't think it would happen? You've been playing both of us for months, Bob. You thought you could use me, use Sophia, and then walk away without any consequences? Well, guess what? You're wrong. You're not getting away with this. Not this time." The more he tried to talk his way out of it, the more frustrated he became. He was a man used to getting away with everything. A man who thought he could take and never have to give anything back. But now, for the first time, he was facing the reality that his actions had consequences. As he fumbled for excuses, his phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at it briefly, and his face drained of color. It was his boss. June and I exchanged a quick look. This was it, the final nail in the coffin. "I think that's your boss calling, Bob," I said, watching him squirm. "It's time to make some things clear, don't you think?" He grabbed the phone, his hands shaking. "Hello," he answered, his voice weak. I could hear the tension in his tone as he listened to whoever was on the other end. The room was dead silent, except for his stammering response. I don't know what you mean. I didn't. What are you talking about? No, I didn't steal anything," he shouted, his voice cracking as he tried to salvage what little dignity he had left. June and I stood there, watching him unravel as the conversation continued. Finally, he slammed the phone down with a shaky breath, his face ashen. "Well, Bob," June said, her tone almost sympathetic, "looks like you've been fired." He looked at us, unable to speak. His job was gone, his reputation destroyed, and all of his attempts to salvage the situation had failed. But there was one last thing we needed to take care of. "We're not done yet," I said, my eyes narrowing as I watched him collapse onto the couch, defeated. Bob looked at me, his face filled with fear. He knew what was coming next. What are you going to do now?" he asked, his voice cracking. I stepped closer, my eyes fixed on him. "You've already lost your job. You've already lost the trust of everyone around you. Now, let's take a look at how your possessions are faring." At that, I walked over to the storage unit where we had hidden the TV, the one thing he had prized above all else. I had planned it perfectly. His entire sense of worth had been tied to that TV, to the things he thought defined his value. And now we were taking it all away. I opened the door and grabbed the TV, making sure Bob saw every moment of it. He stood up, desperate. "You can't do this. That's mine." June shook her head. "It was never yours, Bob. It was always hers." I felt a surge of power as I handed the TV to the man who had agreed to take it for us, watching Bob's face twist in disbelief. No, you can't just take everything. Please." His voice cracked as he begged, but we both knew it was too late. The damage had already been done. With that final humiliation, we left Bob there, standing in the wreckage of his life. It was over. The chaos, the lies, the manipulations, everything Bob had built up over the past years came crumbling down in a single day. He had no job, no friends, no trust left in anyone, and certainly no TV to console him. For the first time, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The satisfaction of seeing him fall didn't come from the destruction of his life. It came from knowing that I was finally free of the web of lies he had spun around me. As I walked away from our apartment, I felt lighter than I had in years. It wasn't just the material things that Bob had taken from me, he had taken my dignity, my trust, and a large part of my self-worth. But in that moment I felt like I had reclaimed all of it. June was by my side through all of this, and in a strange way I was grateful to her. What started as a simple alliance to get back at Bob had turned into something more, a chance to move forward without the weight of betrayal hanging over my head. She wasn't my best friend, but in the end we had shared something far deeper than I could have imagined. A shared experience of being used and manipulated by the same man. As the days went by, I couldn't help but wonder how Bob was handling everything. Was he stewing in his own misery, or was he already plotting his next lie? I didn't care. Whatever was left of him was no longer my problem. The only thing that mattered was that I had taken back my life. But the aftermath wasn't just about Bob. It was about me, about the realization that I had spent so much time letting someone use me without questioning my worth. The man I had loved for 3 years had taken me for granted, and I had allowed it. But not anymore. I started picking up the pieces of my own life. I got back to the things I had put on hold, like finishing that book I had always wanted to read, reconnecting with friends I hadn't seen in months, and spending more time with my family. Slowly but surely I started to feel like myself again, as if the fog of betrayal had lifted, leaving me clear and focused on what really mattered. Then there was the final piece of the puzzle, the closure. I had waited for Bob to reach out, for him to at least acknowledge what had happened. But he didn't. I guess I shouldn't have expected anything else from a man who had always run from the truth. But there was something satisfying in knowing that I had finally taken control of the situation. There was no more running. No more pretending. I had done what I set out to do, not for revenge but for self-respect. One afternoon, I received a message from Bob. It was brief, almost too brief, and it had an air of desperation I hadn't heard from him in the past. I know I've messed up. Please. I just want to talk. I can't lose you too. I stared at the message for a long time. The truth hit me hard. This was it. This was the moment when he finally realized that I wasn't going to come back. That I wasn't going to be the one he could manipulate, the one he could use to fill his empty, selfish life. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision in my chest. The closure wasn't in hearing him beg for forgiveness. It wasn't in any words he could say. The closure was in my ability to finally walk away, to be free of him. I replied with a single message, "It's over, Bob. I'm done. Don't contact me again." And just like that, I closed the chapter on the worst relationship of my life. After all the chaos, the betrayals, and the heartbreak, it was finally time to move on. I knew I couldn't let myself be stuck in the past, no matter how satisfying it was to watch Bob's life crumble. That part of my life had ended, and I needed to close that door for good. In the weeks following my decision to walk away, I focused on rebuilding my life. It wasn't about rushing into anything new. It was about rediscovering who I was before Bob ever entered my life. I'd lost pieces of myself during our relationship, pieces that I'd put aside for his comfort, for his ego, and I had to take them back. I started by doing the things that made me feel alive, things that had once brought me joy but had been put on the back burner. I signed up for yoga classes again, something I had always loved but stopped doing because I was too busy catering to Bob's needs. I reconnected with my old friends, the ones who had always been there for me, and slowly but surely, I began to rebuild the relationships I had neglected. I even found a new hobby, painting. It was something I'd always wanted to try but had never found the time for. There was something incredibly cathartic about putting colors on a canvas, expressing myself in ways I hadn't in a long time. It was as if each brushstroke was a release, a quiet way of letting go of all the pent-up anger and frustration I had carried around for years. One day while I was working on a painting of the ocean, I realized just how much I had changed. I wasn't the same woman who had blindly loved Bob, who had put all her energy into a relationship that was never going to be equal. I had learned to love myself again. I had found strength and forgiveness not for Bob but for me. I had forgiven myself for staying too long, for allowing myself to be used. But most importantly, I had learned that I didn't need anyone to validate my worth. I had finally become whole again. In the middle of all this personal growth, something unexpected happened. I started to notice him, not Bob but someone else. His name was Jake. He worked at the same art studio I had signed up for my painting classes. At first I didn't think much of it. He was just a guy I would occasionally bump into, someone who shared my passion for painting. But over time our casual conversations turned into something deeper. Jake was kind, funny, and most importantly he wasn't trying to use me or manipulate me. He was interested in getting to know me for who I was, not for what I could provide. We started spending more time together, sharing our love for art and life in general. It felt so different, so refreshing compared to what I had been through with Bob. One evening, after we had spent hours discussing everything from art to our personal lives, Jake looked at me, his expression serious but warm. "Sophia," he said, "I just want to say I really admire your strength. You've been through a lot, but you're not letting it define you. You're creating something beautiful with your life." Those words hit me harder than I expected. In that moment, I realized just how far I had come. I had gone from a place of fear, hurt, and uncertainty to a place of empowerment, creativity, and new possibilities. I didn't need to look back at my past anymore. I wasn't the woman who had been used, deceived, and heartbroken. I was someone new, someone who had learned to embrace her worth. And as for Bob, he had become nothing more than a bad memory, a punchline, and the past I was finally free of. Bob's presence in my life had become a distant memory, a fading echo of a man who had once played such a significant role in my world. I had moved on, but there were moments, however brief, when his shadow still lingered. I had learned to let go, but the truth was, the final piece of closure I needed was to see Bob face the consequences of everything he had done. Not just for me, but for all the other women he had lied to, for all the lives he had manipulated. I couldn't fully move on without knowing he was forced to confront the truth that he was a fraud, a user, and that no one would ever believe in him again. It was on an ordinary Friday afternoon that the opportunity for the final blow presented itself. I had just finished painting in the studio, the brush in my hand feeling familiar and comforting, when I checked my phone. There was a notification from a mutual acquaintance. It was a link to a news article. I clicked it, and as I read the headline, a small smile crept up on my face. "Bob's fall from grace continues. Fired from job under investigation for fraud." The article went on to explain how Bob's former boss had conducted an internal audit after receiving multiple anonymous tips. His shady practices had finally caught up with him. Not only was he out of a job, but he was now being investigated for financial fraud, the very thing he had been doing behind my back. I felt a sense of vindication, but it wasn't the same satisfaction I had once imagined. There was no gloating. There was no joy in seeing him suffer. Instead, it was a quiet, almost surreal realization that justice had finally been served, no thanks to me or anyone else. Bob's downfall had been set in motion the moment he decided to use people for his own gain. In the article, it mentioned that Bob was also facing criminal charges for using other people's identities to secure loans and borrow money. The theft, the deceit, and the lack of accountability had followed him like a shadow, finally catching up with him. The final act was unfolding. I wasn't there to witness it in person, but somehow I didn't need to. The weight of the situation was clear. I had already won. I sat back, processing the news, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over me. This wasn't the kind of closure I had initially wanted. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about knowing that Bob's lies and deceit had finally caught up with him, in a way that he could no longer escape. I thought about how I had once believed I needed to punish him. How I had wanted him to feel the sting of betrayal just like I had. But the truth was, life had already done that for me. Bob was now the one facing the consequences of his actions, and it was something I didn't have to lift a finger for. I was free, completely and utterly free. Not just from Bob, but from the anger, the hurt, the need for revenge. It was gone, replaced with a quiet, steady strength that could only come from experiencing the worst and still finding a way to move forward. Bob's name had become a whisper in the past, something that would fade into the background of my life, a reminder of the person I used to be, the woman who had been used, who had been deceived. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I had become someone new, someone stronger, wiser, and much more empowered. I was no longer defined by what he had done to me. I had reclaimed my life, my happiness, and my self-worth. As I took one last glance at the article, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. This was the end of a chapter I'd been carrying for far too long. And in that moment, I realized I was finally free. It's strange how life works. One moment, you're stuck in the past, consumed by the need to get back at someone who wronged you. And then, as if by magic, things start falling into place, and you realize the revenge you sought was never as sweet as the freedom that comes from moving on. That was the lesson I learned after the final chapter of Bob's downfall played out. The closure I thought I needed didn't come in the form of a confrontation or a revenge scheme. It came quietly, with a sense of peace, knowing that Bob would never again have the power to hurt me or anyone else the way he did. In the months that followed, I began to truly rebuild. I took time for myself for the first time in years. No more pretending. No more accommodating someone else's insecurities or living for someone who didn't appreciate me. This was my time to breathe, to heal, and to become the person I had always wanted to be without anyone holding me back. I started traveling again, something I had stopped doing after Bob had discouraged it. It wasn't that he ever said I couldn't go, but there was always some subtle guilt trip about how he wouldn't be able to afford things without me. I had sacrificed so much of my life for him, but that was over now. I reconnected with old friends, and for the first time I felt like I was living for me, not anyone else. I went to a small town upstate, spent a week in the mountains with no phone service, just the quiet hum of nature. It was there that I felt something stir inside me, a realization that I had been so much more than I gave myself credit for. I was strong, independent, and capable of creating my own happiness. No one needed to complete me, I was already complete on my own. When I came back, I was a different person. Sure, there were still scars from the past, but they weren't the painful reminders they used to be. They had healed. I felt empowered and had learned to take responsibility for my happiness. The person I was when I was with Bob had faded into the background, and I was starting a brand new chapter of my life. Months later, I got a call from June. We hadn't talked much since the whole ordeal, but she reached out and we agreed to meet for lunch. "Hey, Sophia," she said, a little hesitant at first. "I just wanted to check in. How are you doing?" It was good to hear from her, and I could tell she genuinely cared. We met at a cafe, and as we sat down, she apologized for her role in everything. But I wasn't angry anymore. I understood her position, and while I wished things had played out differently, I was glad to see her taking charge of her life as well. "I'm doing great, actually," I said, sipping my coffee. "I've been traveling, working on myself, and, believe it or not, I'm happy." Her eyes widened. "That's amazing. I'm really glad you're doing well. I've been trying to rebuild too. And honestly, I owe a lot of it to you. You helped me see that I don't have to let him define me." That's when I realized how far we both had come. Our shared experience, though painful, had allowed us to rebuild in our own ways. We had both emerged from the wreckage of Bob's manipulation and had found strength in each other, even though we had been on opposite sides of the same betrayal. "You know," I said, "I'm starting to realize that I'm better off without all of this drama. It's just not worth it. I've learned to trust myself more than I ever did." June smiled, and for the first time, I saw a woman who had truly taken charge of her own life. No more waiting for someone else to validate her. No more playing a role in someone else's game. We parted ways that afternoon, both of us on better paths than we'd ever been. And as I walked away, I realized something important. Revenge, while it may feel sweet in the moment, never truly gives us what we need. What I needed wasn't to break someone else down. It was to build myself up. And that's exactly what I did. Bob was long gone from my life, and his place had been filled with new beginnings, self-love, and a confidence that would never fade. As time passed, the sharp edges of my past began to smooth out. The anger, the betrayal, and the hurt that had once consumed me gradually faded, replaced by a new understanding of self-worth. I didn't need to cling to my old hurts to justify who I was becoming. I had spent so much time letting the past define me, but now I was the one defining my future. I had never imagined I could feel this way, free, unburdened, and completely in control of my life. The person I had been when I was with Bob was like a shadow, distant and barely recognizable. That version of me had been unsure, dependent, and trapped by someone else's narrative. The woman I was now, though, was strong. She was in charge, and for the first time she loved herself completely. I made a pact with myself: no more letting others dictate my happiness. I was no longer going to sit back and be used. I was going to live for me, for my dreams, and for my happiness. Everything I had done, every choice, every step, had brought me to this moment of clarity, this moment of freedom. It was during this period of self-reflection that I found myself in a new relationship with life, one that wasn't tied to expectations or performance. I stopped holding on to the idea that I needed someone else to complete me. I was already complete. It wasn't about being in a relationship or having anyone by my side. It was about embracing my own company, being content in my own skin, and knowing that I was enough, just as I was. And just when I thought things couldn't get better, life threw me a curveball. I was at a local art gallery showing one evening, quietly enjoying the art when I bumped into someone I hadn't seen in years: Matt. He was an old friend, someone I had once shared a connection with before Bob came into the picture. Matt had always been kind, attentive, and respectful in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. We had parted ways when I got serious with Bob, but now I couldn't help but smile when I saw him. We exchanged pleasantries, and it was like no time had passed. The conversation flowed easily, as if we were picking up right where we had left off. And this time I wasn't thinking about my past. I wasn't comparing him to Bob or wondering if he would make the same mistakes. I wasn't looking for validation. I was just enjoying the moment. As we walked through the gallery talking about our lives and our experiences, something became crystal clear. I was ready for a new beginning. And maybe, just maybe, that new beginning could involve someone who genuinely cared, who respected me, and who wouldn't take advantage of my kindness. But even more importantly, I realized that I didn't need anyone to feel whole. Matt was someone who could walk beside me, not someone I needed to fix or save. That, I realized, was the difference. I had learned how to love myself enough to be open to someone else without losing my sense of self. And as the night drew to a close, Matt asked if I wanted to grab a coffee sometime. My heart gave a little flutter, but I didn't let it control me. I wasn't rushing into anything. I wasn't looking for quick fixes or temporary solutions. I was looking for genuine connections, connections that were built on mutual respect, trust, and love. As I agreed to meet him again, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I wasn't in a rush anymore. I wasn't seeking validation or redemption from anyone else. I had found my peace. As the months passed, I found myself thinking back on everything that had led me here. There were times, especially during the hardest parts of the journey, when I thought I would never be able to escape the weight of betrayal. When I thought I would never feel whole again or be able to trust someone the way I had trusted Bob. But as time healed those wounds, I came to realize that pain isn't something we get over. It's something we learn to live with, and eventually, it makes us stronger. The scars from my past still existed, but they no longer controlled me. They were just part of the story, part of what had shaped me into who I was today. The woman I had become was no longer driven by revenge or the need to prove a point. She was simply living her life, content, self-assured, and no longer willing to settle for anything less than she deserved. I looked around me at the life I was building. I had my art, my friends, my sense of peace. And slowly, as I continued to heal, I realized that everything I had been through, the hurt, the lies, the anger, had all been necessary for me to get to this point. It had forced me to face the parts of myself I had neglected, to acknowledge my own strength, and to finally own my life in a way I had never done before. I had let go of the resentment, the constant yearning for revenge. That was the greatest freedom of all. It was never about Bob losing everything, it was about me gaining back everything he had tried to take from me. My trust, my love, my self-respect. Those were the things I had nearly lost, but in the end I found them again. And then there was Matt. Our friendship had blossomed slowly, built on mutual respect and understanding. He was never in a rush to be anything more than what we were. Our relationship was something new, something that wasn't based on fixing past mistakes or filling in gaps left by previous failures. It was built on the present, the here and now, with all the potential for a future that didn't carry the baggage of old wounds. As I sat in the park one sunny afternoon, reading a book and enjoying the quiet peace around me, I thought about how far I had come. From the girl who had been used and manipulated by Bob to the woman who had reclaimed her own power, her voice, and her future. There was no more fear of being taken advantage of. No more fear of being overlooked or ignored. I had learned to trust myself, and that was the most important lesson of all. Matt showed up right on time as he always did, his easy smile and calm presence like a warm breeze. He had never rushed me or tried to change anything about me. He was just there, and I appreciated him for that. "Hey," he said, sitting down next to me, his eyes soft with affection. "How's your day going?" "It's perfect," I said, smiling back. "I'm just happy to be here, you know? Happy to be myself again." He looked at me as if seeing me in a new light and nodded. "I'm glad to hear that. I've always admired your strength, Sophia. You've come so far." I couldn't help but laugh. "I've had to," I said, my eyes meeting his. "It wasn't easy, but I'm glad I did." And in that moment, I knew I was finally at peace. Bob, June, all the people who had been part of my past, they were gone now, replaced by a future that felt full of possibilities. I didn't need revenge to feel complete. I had built something better than that, a life that was mine without anyone holding me back. As the sun began to set, I leaned back, feeling the weight of the past fall away completely. I had forgiven myself. I had forgiven them. And I was ready to step into the future, free from the chains of my past. The days flowed into weeks and the weeks into months. I continued to find myself more and more comfortable in my new life. The echoes of the past faded into nothingness, and I could finally breathe without the weight of resentment hanging over me. I had gone through so much, betrayal, heartache, and frustration. But in the end, I came out of it stronger than I ever thought possible. I had learned that true freedom wasn't just about escaping the past. It was about creating a future where I was in control. The relationship with Matt continued to grow, but I never allowed it to define me. I didn't need him to complete me, to fill the holes Bob had left behind. If anything, he added to the richness of my life without being the center of it. I was still me, Sophia, a woman who had learned to trust her instincts and take care of herself first. As the seasons changed, I found myself thinking less and less about Bob. He had become a distant memory, a chapter in my life that I was ready to leave behind. Every time I thought about him, it was with a sense of detachment, as though he no longer had any hold over my emotions. The rage, the hurt, it was all gone. I had reclaimed my power. I started traveling again, visiting places I had always dreamed of. Each trip brought me more clarity and a deeper sense of self. Whether it was hiking through the Appalachian Mountains or walking the streets of Paris, I realized that the world was full of opportunities, and I was ready to seize them. One evening, as I sat at a cafe overlooking the river in Paris, a gentle breeze tugging at my hair, I felt a deep sense of contentment. I had never imagined that I would find myself here, sitting alone in a city that felt like a dream. But the truth was, I wasn't really alone. I had myself. I had my dreams. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting for anyone else to make me happy. I thought about how far I had come. It had taken time, so much time, and the journey hadn't been easy. But the woman I had become was someone I could be proud of. I had taken the hard lessons and turned them into something beautiful. I had transformed my pain into purpose. Bob was nothing more than a distant memory now, a reminder of how I had once allowed myself to be blinded by love. But he was no longer part of my story. The woman I was today was strong, confident, and in control of her own destiny. Matt texted me later that night, and as we made plans to meet again, I couldn't help but smile. There was no rush. There was no need to define anything or fit into some mold. I was living life on my own terms, and whatever came next was just another chapter in the story I was writing. In that moment, I realized that this peace, this freedom, this sense of self, was the reward I had been searching for all along. It wasn't revenge that had set me free. It wasn't anger or hatred. It was the ability to let go, to stop holding on to the past, and to embrace who I was becoming. And for the first time in my life, I knew that I was enough.